So why the TOEIC test? Well, according to ETS from their website, the TOEIC listening and reading test is a valid assessment of English language reading and listening skills for the workplace. Employers worldwide use the TOEIC test to determine who can communicate effectively in English across borders and cultures with coworkers and clients. These particular skills are necessary for email, written reports, newsletters, and other forms of business correspondence. And your TOEIC scores can help to make you a stronger candidate for job opportunities with global organizations. Demonstrate your ability to communicate across borders and cultures with coworkers and clients. Positively affect hiring decisions and other employment opportunities. And help you obtain new opportunities within a company. So, what went into the design for the TOEIC test? Where did their content come from? Well, as you can see here, ETS, the Educational Testing Service, has basically looked at a wide variety of areas of business and, of course, everyday life as well to kind of help inform the test design. I'm not going to go through and read every particular item here on the list, but as you can see, several areas are covered: general business, manufacturing, personnel and recruiting, health, dining out. So if you especially have a lot of workplace experience before you take the TOEIC, certainly I think you will find that the test will certainly be something you're very well prepared for. And of course, I also like to tell my students in our program that the TOEIC is also very good for just kind of assessing your everyday language ability, your ability to communicate with people around you pretty much on a daily and weekly basis. Now, on the TOEIC reading section, there are 100 questions in 75 minutes. Basically, it's divided into 3 sections. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at Part 5, which is the incomplete sentences section. And there are 40 questions on the test. The other particular sections we will address in future videos. Now, oftentimes students want to know just exactly what do the TOEIC scores tell me. Well, this is one area in which ETS has not necessarily given us a lot of information, but this was done as a particular study in several different countries. This one, for example, is from Bangkok. It was done to kind of compile to see what were the particular scores that this particular set of 5-star hotels, what they were using to determine who gets what position in their company. Now again, first off, when they refer to total score, this was done back in 1999, so at the time there were only reading and listening scores. But as you can see here to the left, they indicate the types of positions that they have at these particular hotels, and then the types of minimum scores that they generally recommend for people to apply for these positions. So as you can see, obviously, a lower score would be for a position where English is not used as much. And then, of course, for people who actually have to engage the public, all the way up to assistant manager or outlet manager, a score of 600 is what they're looking for. And again, the maximum scores here generally range in the 900. So as you can see, this will give you sort of a frame of reference when it comes to scoring, and maybe give you an idea as to what particular score you might be interested in on the test. As we said before, 900, actually 990 is the maximum score range. This was also a particular study done in Switzerland for some of the positions in their country. So again, as you can see, positions where maybe the need to communicate in English is perhaps a little bit less, the score range is a little bit lower. And of course, looking at the upper end, the score range is a little bit higher. Actually considerably higher. Now, whenever we begin talking about any standardized assessment, it's always good to review a little bit about general test-taking strategy. Now, of course, just like any standardized test, we're going to be looking at the necessity for how to answer a multiple choice. Mainly because a lot of standardized tests follow the multiple choice route. But specifically for a test such as the TOEIC, different categories on the test will require different strategies. But first, let's look at the general strategy that we'll be using throughout this series. Now again, since this is a multiple choice test, it's best to understand how the test makers develop the test. So we're going to kind of look at a very simple sample question and kind of deconstruct it to see if we can understand how this test is created. So you will see here a fairly simple question, and I'm sure you probably already know the answer. Well, the purpose here first is to analyze the different parts of the question. So first off, the top part there that you see, oftentimes we will refer to as the question or the prompt. Now this one, of course, is a question because it involves a question mark. But sometimes it will not actually be a question, but it will prompt you, which is where the word prompt is coming from. It will prompt you to answer. Now below you will see the part that we refer to in general as the answer stem. This is where you can find the answer choices. So obviously the right answer, the right choice is the answer. But the other choices are often called distractors. So from the 4 choices in the answer stem, these answer options, 3 of them are going to try to distract you in different ways from finding the correct answer. So in this case, let's think about how do they construct these particular tests. How do they try to distract us or trick us? Well, if you have a test that has 4 to 5 answer choices, then this is sort of how the test design usually works. 1, of course, will be the answer. But 1 to 2 of the distractors will be completely wrong. In other words, they have no hope in any particular context of being correct. But then there are usually 1 to 2 distractors that look pretty good, except for perhaps 1 small problem. Now, the more experienced you are at taking this test, then probably the better you will be at utilizing this strategy, and maybe you won't necessarily need this particular part of the video. But let's assume for a minute that you did not know that this is how test makers create their assessments. So let's apply the strategy here to our simple question. So first off, which one or ones do we see would be completely wrong? Now for you, you may go ahead and know which one is the answer and eliminate all of the other ones. But let's assume for a moment. Let's try to imagine that we are the average test taker. Well, in this case, we could see easily that B is wrong. So the ones we have remaining, some of these might look good, but perhaps there's only some small problem with them. So why is that? And again, you may already know the answer, but I'm asking you not to choose it right now. Well, for example, Monday, letter A, might look good, but there's some small problem, which of course we'll discuss in a moment. And D has lots of numbers, so it could possibly be confused as the answer. Of course, if you knew the answer, then D would be an easy one to eliminate. But for example, look at A again. A might be acceptable, and again, only might, if it said, for example, on Monday. Now, that would not be the best answer choice anyway. Even if it said on Monday, that doesn't quite answer the question, what time is it? Generally, we associate time, of course, with like looking at a clock. But again, it might be acceptable in some other context. But the idea here is that it would not be the best answer choice for this question. And of course, D might confuse somebody because it looks like a bunch of numbers. But that's only in case they didn't recognize that this is a date and not a time. So in this case, we know now that C is the answer. So this particular process is called the process of elimination. From now on, we're going to refer to it as POE. Now you need to master this process in order to become a better test taker. Now first off, many students believe that that means that they'll just eliminate answer choices that they don't know. And again, that's not the idea. Oftentimes you get a question with a set of answer choices, and maybe there are 1 or 2 answers that look pretty good. The idea here is that process of elimination is to give you a better chance. So the first thing I tell students is you need to be confident in those choices. So don't eliminate something if you don't know what it means. So only eliminate answer choices you know are incorrect. Now this brings us to kind of a hint when it comes to general test strategy. And that's oftentimes what I tell students is don't just choose the right answer first. Make sure you can eliminate the other answer choices, and then you'll have a better percentage to guess the right answer. Now, obviously, if you know the right answer and are pretty confident, I'm not going to tell you to not answer the question. But in this case, what I'm trying to say is this is a process, a habit that we're trying to develop. So don't just choose the right answer yet. Just keep it in the back of your mind. Now, again, the difficult thing is when we start getting down to only a few choices. So for example, if you've reduced your choices to maybe 2, and you have one answer choice that maybe you know and one that you don't, always try both in the problem and see if you know the other one of them works. If it does work, so if you have two choices, one you know, one you don't, and the one you know works, that probably is going to be the correct answer, or at least your best choice. But remember, process of elimination is not a 100% solution. So again, no test strategy is. The only way you're ever going to improve completely on this test is to improve your English. So remember, process of elimination is just to give yourself a better chance. Okay, now let's look a little more specifically at the first type of question we're going to see on the reading test, and that is the incomplete sentences, or question type number 5. Now, first off, we need to recognize that question type number 5 is going to involve two major areas. And, of course, they're going to have smaller subcategories in these areas as well. Well, those two major areas are grammar patterns and word choice. Now, grammar patterns focus on generally what we might consider to be word families. And also we will see uses of verbs, different forms, different tenses, and so on. The word choice questions, on the other hand, tend to be a little more confusing because oftentimes the words themselves will not be the same word. Whereas with the grammar patterns question, many times it'll be the same basic word, but just different versions of it. Whereas with the word choice, we often have different words, but the idea is they're all the same part of speech. So for example, you may have a list of words that appear to be very different, but in fact they may all be adverbs, or conjunctions, or prepositions. The last category is one that often does kind of involve more of the traditional sort of business or workplace, and that's just the general business words that we often confuse. And we'll take a look at some of those in just a moment. So again, you need to learn these two particular major areas because we will constantly be referring to them throughout the video, and you will need to sort of develop the, and kind of memorize and develop the habit of thinking about questions in these terms. Now, as I said earlier, with the particular types of questions, the good thing about the TOEIC is that the TOEIC has very specific sections. So, for example, the first part of the reading test is going to be this incomplete text. However, when we look at the questions in the incomplete text section, we often need to be able to recognize the type of question very quickly. In fact, we almost need to be able to recognize it before we try to answer it. So really what we're trying to do here in this video is to help you understand how to make those decisions based on which particular area is being tested. So for example, when you look at a question, do you know that it's a grammar question or a word choice question? And then that will help bring up a series of choices and options to help you in better solving the problem. So this is extremely helpful. This will help you both understand what the prompt is asking and what the choices in the answer stem are. Now we're going to look at 3 sample questions given to us by the Examinee Handbook, which is again produced by ETS. You'll be able to find a link to the handbook at the bottom of this video. And even though I will put the information here on the screen, I would highly recommend that you download the Examinee Handbook and use throughout this video series. So let's look at the question and prompt first for question number 1. A late fee will be applied to your account blank. Payment is not received by March 31st. Now, at this point, what can we learn by just looking at the prompt itself? So, not looking at the other answer choices, but just the prompt. Well, first off, the key is to focus on what is there, not what is not. So, we're not going to pay attention to this blank just at the moment. We're going to focus more on what we do have. Well, as we divide the sentence into 2 parts, we notice that we have almost 2 grammatically complete ideas. A late fee will be applied to your account. Payment is not received by March 31st. Now, from these 2 choices, though, which one seems to be complete? Like, which one actually is complete by itself? Which one could you use as a sentence by itself? Well, that would be the first choice. Something seems to be missing in the second choice. Payment is not received by March 31st. It sounds like we were expecting something else to happen there. So we recognize that the second part of the sentence is not complete. It is missing something to make it complete, but what is that? Well, the next step now is to look at the answer stem. So by looking at the answer stem, we can get a more complete idea as to the major area that's being tested. So just by looking at it very quickly, does this seem to be a grammar question or a word choice question? Well, remember, if it's a grammar question, they would all basically be the same idea, but maybe in a different form, like different verb forms, or different members of the same word family. But word choice questions are the same grammatical category, but appear to be different words. So in this case, we're actually dealing with a word choice question. Now remember, word choice questions, instead of focusing on the grammatical usage, are focusing more on the meaning and how it's used in the context. So it would even be more helpful to think about what is the subcategory that these words belong to. So as we go back for a moment to the two major areas and focus on the word choice section, we can see that these types of questions fall into the category of connecting words or conjunctions. Now, what we're going to do very quickly is go through each one by one, and try to decide what type of conjunction or connector they are. For example, and is considered a conjunction that connects equal things. For example, a Sprite and a Pepsi. Whether is an adverb connector that usually relates to the condition of a choice. So, for example, I need to know whether or not you will go. But is a conjunction indicating a change or negation, but again, usually of grammatically equal things. I need this, but not this. So notice the particular balance of the sentence indicates that both ideas are grammatically the same. And then finally, another adverb connector that relates to a condition or choice. For example, I need to know if you are going. Now, which ones can we eliminate? As we said before, we generally want to try to find the ones that seem to be completely wrong first. Well, remember earlier we determined that both parts of the sentence are not equal, because both are not complete. Only the first part was considered to be complete. So in this case, A and C are conjunctions that we use only if both parts of the sentence happen to be complete. So in this case, we can easily eliminate A and C. What do we have left now? Well, now we have those two conditional connectors. Both of them are adverb connectors. But of course, they both cannot be correct. So now comes the point where we look at the strategy and think about, well, how do we compare the two to each other? In other words, what is the difference between them? Well, for example, whether usually indicates a choice between something or not, though that choice might be implied. Now, here's an example. Whether you were staying or not, I need to know how many people are coming. So notice in this particular situation, neither choice, whether you stay or you don't stay, these choices don't affect what's happening in the second part of the sentence. So in this case, we can think of the meaning of the word whether in this situation as similar to in spite of. So in this case, in spite of what you're going to say, I still need to know something. If, on the other hand, does not always mean that there is this choice. So, for example, look at the sentence, if you are staying. So in other words, you've told me that maybe you're going to stay, so if you are staying, I need to know how many people are coming. Well, now in this case, it's a conditional situation, but we're focusing only on the one possibility. And notice that it will impact the decision I'm going to make. However, we don't know what the other possibility would be if the person isn't staying. So in this case, if you are staying, this is what I need to know. But if you are not staying, we don't know. It doesn't say or indicate that in the sentence. If we also think about an extra piece of information, tends to focus on the result of something. So if this were to happen, then something would naturally follow. Whereas in the first example with whether, the result of the condition didn't really matter. So in this case, which one makes sense? So we're going to try both of them in the sentence. A late fee will be applied to your account whether payment is not received by March 31st. Well, remember, whether indicates that there would be a choice there. There is no other choice stated or even implied. We don't know what would happen. So in this case, we're presented with only the one possibility, that something will happen if something is not done. So in this case, if is our answer. Now this brings us to thinking about a TOEIC shortcut. So think of these little shortcuts as sort of hints or ideas that will help you be a little more efficient on the test. So if you notice, when we looked at the prompt, we got some information about the question. But when we looked at the answer stem, we were immediately able to identify what type of question it was going to be. Was it a grammar question or word choice? So in this case, I'm going to recommend that you should probably look at the answer stem first in order to identify what kind of question it's going to be. And I think from there you'll be able to make a better decision, and certainly one that might be more efficient. Now let's look at question number 2. So this time we're going to look at the answer stem first. So here are my choices. Now once again, you notice these choices. So let's start thinking about what type of question it will be. What about the subcategory that it'll belong to? And then just to think about for a moment the part of speech. Now, for example, some of these kind of look like verbs, but then I notice 2 of the choices are adjectives. Well, immediately that should tell us that this is not going to be a grammar question. Because remember, a grammar question is going to be different parts of speech, but from the same type of word. In other words, they're going to appear mostly the same. These words do not appear the same. In fact, they actually are all the same part of speech. So in this case, we're looking at a word choice question again. Now, what category would it belong to? Well, looking over the choices, since they mostly appear to be vocabulary type words, words with a particular content, they belong to the last category, business words that we often confuse. So our answers are that this is a word choice question. It's a general business word, or confused, and as we said before, since they're word choice questions, that means the part of speech will be the same for all of them. In this case, adjective. So now let's look at the prompt. The award is given to an individual who has made blank contributions to the community through volunteer work. Now, what does the prompt tell us? Well, again, we try to focus on what is there. Well, I notice that the word contributions is the word that's right after the particular blank. I also notice that the word made is before the particular blank. So in this case, I can probably guess that contributions is actually the object of the verb has made. And that most likely, since we know we're looking at an adjective now, that the adjective is going to be directly describing the word contributions. So notice how much faster it was able to identify the idea by looking at the answer stem first. Now this brings us to a concept we call collocations or collocations. So what we're looking for is what we call a collocation. So what is that? Well, oftentimes when we have 2 words that seem to belong together, words that seem to have, even though they're not determined by their grammatical relationship, they seem to have a grammatical relationship between each other. For example, an adjective describing a noun, a subject with using a verb, or a verb using a particular object. And oftentimes this is something you will see on the TOEIC. So first off, let's look at some common examples of collocations. Now, for example, there are those collocations we might think of as things we see every day. And many of these are determined by perhaps context or even specifically culture. I know many times when I share these examples with my students, for example, I'll say bacon and many students don't necessarily know what the second word is. But what's interesting is almost every English-speaking American would probably say bacon and eggs. Now, others might know black and white because they seem to be natural opposites. But for example, if I said cream and, again, sometimes students from other countries would not necessarily know that Americans would say sugar, for example. So these particular collocations are ones that are kind of developed that we use almost every day, and we associate them together, and again, largely because of either our culture or the context that's defining them. Now, perhaps you can think of some others too. Now, some other ones, though, and these are the ones that we're probably going to see more on the test, are those that are very much contextually defined. So again, words that often tend to be maybe idiomatic, or words that do make sense in general business contexts, and these might also be true in other culture ideas as well, but generally they kind of reflect a particular idiomatic idea that's, again, specific to our language. For example, when we say somebody is a big deal, notice we don't really say a large deal. So in this case, we're referring to that he is somebody who's really important. But for some reason, we associate big and deal together. This is one of those kind of idiomatic type expressions that we just have to learn, and we generally can't substitute other words for them. The same thing with the second example. Satisfaction guaranteed. Now notice you could try to use substitutions, but they somehow lose the meaning. For example, satisfaction is similar to the idea of happiness or contentedness, but we can't guarantee happiness. And also when we say guarantee, generally we think of guarantee as something that's perhaps a little more formal than promised. We don't say satisfaction is promised, we say it's guaranteed, which generally means some sort of refund might be given if the product that you bought wasn't so great. We also think about computers, for example. We call them laptop or notebook computers. So again, of course, this is changing. We've got iPads and other things, but generally notice we don't use other words to collocate with computer. So again, many of these particular ideas are things that are defined by their context, and they oftentimes can take on an idiomatic dimension as well. So in this situation, we kind of have to think about which words do seem to go together with the word contribution. Now remember, a contribution is a donation or a gift, usually of money. So now let's look at our choices again. Which ones can we eliminate first? So thinking about which ones don't seem to go together with the idea of contribution, probably the first one we can eliminate easily is the idea of secure. Now, of course, this has kind of changed if we think about the internet, but generally we don't associate the word secure and contributions. We might think of a secure payment, perhaps even a donation that we can make in a secure way. But generally we don't say secure contributions. So in this case, this is one that we could probably eliminate pretty easily. Now the other three are a little more difficult. But I do believe if we look a little more carefully, we can also see that contributions themselves are not updated. However, this is perhaps, again, trying to confuse you because we think of updated perhaps as similar to the word recent. Now, we can make a recent contribution, but we don't say an updated contribution. So again, this is something that you just have to learn through using, through experience, through listening and reading, and perhaps something you might have experienced before. So in this case, now we've got two choices. How do we decide between the two? Well, one thing I suggest for these types of collocative ideas is, first off, try the words in the blank themselves. And then, of course, think about the nature of the word contribution. Finally, look at the entire context. For example, we often think about contributions as how big or small they are. We generally don't think about contributions as being very detailed. In addition, when we look at the rest of the context, we recognize that this person is receiving an award for their contributions. So in this case, generally we give awards for people who give a lot of money or a lot of effort. So in this case, if I think about the word large, which again may not necessarily perfectly go in the blank, large is very similar to the idea of significant. So in this case, B is going to be our answer. So this brings us to our next TOEIC shortcut. When we think about general business words, we really do need to think about the other words that are going together with it. So generally the first thing I tell students is when you can recognize that these are just confusing business words, look immediately at the words before and after the blank. Oftentimes, you might be able to guess the particular pattern even without even thinking too hard. However, as we saw in this particular example, if you're not very familiar with the use of the other words, again, you may have to start making some very, kind of informed decisions as to how to eliminate those answer choices. But again, make sure you look before and after the blank in order to try to establish what particular words are going together with the business word. Now let's look at the final question for this video, question number 3. And again, looking at the answer stem, one thing we start to notice right away is that all of the answer choices seem very similar. Well, that should pretty much tell us right now that what we're looking at is a grammar pattern question. Now, since they were using the word establish, and they all appear to be verb forms, we're actually looking at the verb form and tenses idea. Now, with grammar questions, we have to think about, okay, what is the subcategory you're looking for? Well, for example, with verb questions, generally we look at the following things. The tense, so for example, is it present, past? The form, is it perfect or progressive? If it is a verb, what's the subject of that verb going to be? Is there an object to the verb? Is the form of the sentence going to be in the active or passive voice? Is there going to be a participle that's being used with it? And is there a helping verb together? Or is the verb going to be in an infinitive form, which generally is formed with to plus the simple form of the word? So let's look at the answer stem again and immediately try to identify, well, what are the verb forms we have? Well, A is an infinitive form. B appears to be the past tense, but it could be a past participle as well. In this case, C, we do have a verb in the past, but it's also in the passive voice. It was established. And again, the passive voice is usually be plus a past participle. For D, establishing, and we have to be careful here because obviously establishing could also be an adjective idea. But in this case, it's most likely going to be either a progressive or an active participle. Since we're all looking at verb forms, generally the TOEIC will not try to confuse you by mixing a grammar question and a word choice question. Now, since this is a verb-related question, we got to think of a few things. Verbs are very complicated. So when we look at the prompt itself, we need to ask ourselves these questions. When did the action take place? Who or what is doing the action? And is it even logical for this person or this thing to do it? Who or what is receiving the action, if that's even possible? And are we looking for a complete verb or only part of a verb? So for example, we saw that we had only a participle as one of the choices. Is there another part of the verb, like a helping verb, in the actual answer, in the prompt? Now let's look at the prompt. Last year, Andrea Choi, blank, the Choi Economic Research Center at Upton University. So when did it happen? Well, we see the words last year. Who or what is doing the action? Well, again, there's no other verb in the sentence, so we can assume that the person before the blank is going to be the subject. So in this case, Andrea Choi. Is it logical for this person to do something? Well, again, Andrea Choi is doing something, so that seems very logical. And who or what seems to be receiving the action? Well, in this case, it appears to be this research center is receiving the action of the verb. So it looks like Andrea Choi is doing something to this particular research center. And as we said, it seems to be logical. Now, as we bring back in the verb choices, we can see that the word establish does seem to be, in this case, needing something to where she is using the particular verb to do something. So as we bring back in the answer choices, let's try to expand a little bit on our thought process when it comes to elimination. So A, for example, an infinitive usually needs to follow another verb. Well, in this case, there is no other verb in the sentence. So I think we can go ahead and easily eliminate A because A needs another verb in the sentence. Now this one could be used as the past tense as an active verb. So we can keep it here for a moment. See is also in the past tense, but it's in the passive voice. Now, in this case, since we don't necessarily want to eliminate all of our choices yet, we're keeping B. Why don't we keep C as well, since both appear to be in the past? And finally, this is a participle, but as we mentioned before, participles usually need helping verbs. Well, in this case, there isn't one already in the sentence, so we're going to eliminate this one as well. Now, how do we decide between these two choices? Well, again, both are in the past tense, but the difference between them is that one is in the active and one is in the passive voice. So in this case, it does appear that that is the main difference. Well, since Andrea Choi is the subject and she is a person, it would seem logical that B would be the answer. We usually associate people as being the active subjects of verbs. In fact, this is generally how English works. So in this case, we're probably going to stick with B as our answer. So when we think about this particular question type, and again, this is less a shortcut than it really is a very important hint or a piece of advice, you really do need to be aware of all of the grammar rules as they apply to this part of the test. Now, as you've noticed, there are really only two basic sections. The word families section and the verb forms. So, especially for the verb forms, you really do need to pay attention to how the verbs interact in the sentence. So, if you see a verb, if you see verb choices, you need to think about the subjects and objects, the tense and the form, the active or passive voices, and of course the participles. Now, this obviously seems like, just generally good English advice to try to learn all of the grammar rules. But as you get more familiar with the TOEIC test, you will notice that most of the grammar questions they put generally are looking at words with just different endings, word families, based on the same word, or verb forms themselves. So I think you'll notice that that's generally the two main areas that grammar plays a part. Now here at the end of the video, it's your turn. First off, take a look at these two questions. Now, as we said before, the first thing we probably should do is look at the answer stems to try to identify what type of questions are these and which subcategories would they belong to. Well, if you look very carefully, both do appear to be word choice questions. If you look at the choice on the left, they appear to be the subcategory of generally confusing business words. The category on the right seems to be involved somewhat with pronouns or some sort of referent type of idea. Now go through and try to eliminate the wrong ones first. So I'll give you a moment to look through if you want to pause the video and try to go through and see which ones would you eliminate. Okay, starting on the left side, as we look at the sentence, Mr. Ikeda, Miss Ikeda, and Mr. Arroyo are the final candidates under blank for the position of Director of Development. First off, we try to understand that the question is saying that there are two people being considered for this position. So in this case, we could probably go ahead and eliminate B, elimination, because they're being chosen, not eliminated in this case. And as we look at the answer choice on the right, of the two animated forms released today, blank is certain to be popular with children, while the other will appeal more to adults, it is apparent that they're referring to that there are two different audiences here. One seems to be popular with one group, and the other will be popular with another. So in this case, A doesn't make any sense. If they're saying that both will be unpopular with both audiences, that doesn't really seem logical. Now looking at the remaining answer choices, what's the difference among them? Now you may have eliminated other answer choices too, and in fact you may already know the answer. But let's take a moment just quickly to consider the difference among these choices. Well, for example, when we're being looked at as final candidates, we could think of consideration and confirmation as fairly similar. But generally, we don't recognize candidates who are being considered for a position. Usually, recognition comes to somebody who's actually done something famous, or done something popular. On the right side, when we think about our answer choices, we look right away and notice that another does not seem to make too much sense. Even though we have the other, generally we think of another as when we're giving a list of ideas. So this would actually be something you would put after the first choice. Well, here in this case, this is the first of the two choices, not the second. So in this case, we could easily eliminate D. Now look at your remaining choices. Which ones do you think makes the most sense? Which ones do you think make the most sense? Well, in this case, A is the answer for the left side. Partly because of the combination here, the collocation of the words under consideration. Generally, people are not under recognition or under confirmation. Confirmation does not necessarily work in this case. Confirmation is not appropriate for the context of hiring. Generally, confirmation is something you might see in a religious ceremony. On the right side, certainly another we've just eliminated. But when we think about the two choices that are remaining, it does appear to be something logical. It is certain to be popular with children. But the question is, what is it? Remember, in the first part of the sentence, there are two animated films. So in this case, it and two don't actually go together. Since the second part of the sentence includes the words the other, generally we think of the balance between one and the other as being the appropriate sort of paired idea when it comes to pronouns. Hopefully you did pretty well with these two questions. So our final thoughts. Recognizing the type of question, whether they're grammar or word choice, and their respective subcategories will help you become more efficient on the test. POE, or the process of elimination, will definitely take time to learn at the beginning, but you will improve as you understand the design of the test better, and how the process of elimination will apply to each specific question type. Now certainly I think these videos are going to be very helpful for you, but they're probably not going to be enough to give you the full picture as to what the types of questions you will see, or giving you lots of practice. First off, a lot of the information from the video is coming from the official TOEIC website. But there are also some ideas here from a textbook that I highly recommend, and this is one that's actually designed with the permission of the Educational Testing Service, and it's called the Tactics for TOEIC Textbook Series by the author Grant True. And we're looking right now from this first video from some ideas from the listening and reading test textbook. But I would also recommend that if you're interested in taking the speaking and writing test, there is a textbook for that as well. And then we are also in the process of developing our new TOEFL and TOEIC preparation website, for which these videos will be a big part. So you will find the link for that at the bottom of this video. So thanks for watching. We'll see you next time for Part 2, Question Type 6, Text Completion.